At 74 years old, after being locked out of the house she and her husband built in 1981, Dorothy Calloway stood on the sidewalk with $15 and a nickel in a brown paper grocery bag. That was it, $15.05. The nickel was the one Walter had pressed into her palm on their first date in 1974, outside the movie theater on Maple Avenue, when he told her he was saving up for something important, and she asked what. He looked at her with those steady gray eyes and said, "You." She kept the nickel for 50 years. It lived in the smallest pocket of every wallet she ever owned. She kept it through 2 moves, a pregnancy, a funeral, and a marriage that lasted 48 years. She kept it when she had nothing else left. She did not go to a shelter. She walked into a storage auction she did not understand and spent her last $15 on a unit no one even bothered to open. The latch snapped, the door groaned upward, and the crowd that had been laughing went completely silent. Because sitting in the dark was not junk, it was something no one expected to find. If you believe that second chances do not come with an expiration date, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on that notification bell. Because what you are about to hear will change how you think about love, about loss, and about the quiet power of hands that never stop building. That morning had started before dawn. Dorothy woke in the smallest bedroom of the house at 318 Magnolia Lane. The room that used to be her sewing studio before Lorraine converted it into a yoga space and moved Dorothy's singer machine to a shelf in the garage where it collected dust beside things no one wanted anymore. She lay still for a moment, listening. Mitch and Lorraine were already up. Their voices came through the floorboards, low and deliberate, carrying that careful flatness people use when they do not want to be overheard. Dorothy knew that tone. She had been hearing it for months, the tone of plans being made about her, without her. She dressed slowly, navy slacks, a cotton blouse with a small collar. Her orthopedic shoes with the Velcro straps that she could fasten without bending too far, because bending too far in the morning meant her lower back would punish her for the rest of the day. She clipped Walter's watch onto her left wrist, same as every morning since he died. The crystal was scratched from decades of contact with door frames and countertops and workbenches. The hands had not moved since 3:47 on a Tuesday afternoon 3 years ago. She wore it anyway. Some things do not need to work to matter. She was halfway down the stairs when Mitch stepped onto the landing below her. He was dressed for work already, suit jacket buttoned, keys in his right hand, but he was not leaving. He stood sideways on the staircase, blocking her path without quite making it obvious. He was a tall man, Mitch, broad through the shoulders, the kind of build that fills a doorway and makes you aware of the space you are no longer permitted to occupy. Dorothy. He never called her mom. We need to talk. Lorraine appeared in the kitchen doorway behind him, arms crossed, chin lifted. She wore the expression she always wore when a decision had already been made and the conversation was just a formality, a performance of consultation that changed nothing because everything had already been arranged. Lorraine was 46 years old. Dorothy had nursed her through colic and chickenpox and a broken wrist from falling off the backyard swing, set Walter built the summer she turned 5. She had driven her to piano lessons every Wednesday for 6 years. She had hemmed her prom dress at 2 in the morning because Lorraine changed her mind about the length, and Dorothy said, "All right, baby, let me get my pins." She had held her in the hospital when Lorraine lost her first pregnancy at 23 and did not know how to grieve something that had never had a name. That was the daughter standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms folded and her decision already made. "We have been looking at some options for you," Mitch said. He was staring at a spot just above Dorothy's left ear. The way people look when they cannot meet your eyes but want to appear as though they are. Places where you would be more comfortable. "I am comfortable here," Dorothy said. "You are not, though," Lorraine said, stepping forward. Her voice was smooth and flat, the way a river looks smooth and flat right before it drops over a falls. "You left the stove on last Tuesday. You forgot your medication twice this month. The stairs alone are a fall risk. We have spoken with Dr. Hargrove, and he agrees that assisted living would be the safest choice for everyone." "I left the stove on once," Dorothy said, "and I take my medication every morning at 6:45. I have for 11 years. Mitch shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He had a square jaw and thick wrists, but nothing behind them held steady. Walter had been a quiet man with steady hands. Mitch was a loud man with restless ones. "There is a facility in Briarwood," Mitch said. His voice was rehearsed and hollow, the sound of a man reading lines someone else had written. Clean rooms, nice grounds, people your age. This is my house, Mitch. A silence fell between them. Lorraine glanced sideways at Mitch. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. Manila. Thick. The house is in my name, Dorothy. Has been for 2 years. You signed the transfer yourself. For estate planning. Remember? Dorothy stared at the envelope. She remembered. 8 months after Walter's funeral. An evening at the kitchen table. Lorraine spreading papers in front of her, explaining something about probate and tax liability and protecting the property from complications down the line. Dorothy had signed where Lorraine pointed because she was her daughter, and Dorothy was tired and grief-hollowed, and she trusted her to handle things she could not face. The ink was barely dry on Walter's death certificate. The house still smelled like his coffee, and her daughter put papers in front of her and said, "Sign here, and here, and here." "That was not what you told me I was signing," Dorothy said. Lorraine's jaw tightened. "You signed it, and we have decided it is best if you get settled somewhere more appropriate. We have already made calls. I am not going to any facility." Mitch set the envelope on the stair railing. He still had not met her eyes. Not once. "Then you will need to make your own arrangements. We cannot have you here anymore, Dorothy. It is not safe." Dorothy looked at her daughter. 46 years old, standing behind her husband in the house her father built. The house where Walter had framed the walls and hung the drywall and laid the hardwood floors with his own hands over the summer of '81, while Dorothy brought him lemonade and sandwiches and their baby daughter slept in a portable crib on the shaded porch. The house where Lorraine took her first steps on the living room floor, Walter sanded smooth so there would be no splinters under her bare feet. "Your father would be ashamed of you," Dorothy said quietly. Something moved across Lorraine's face. Then it was gone. "You have 20 minutes to get your things," Mitch said. She did not get 20. She got 15. Lorraine stood in the doorway of the small bedroom while Dorothy packed, arms folded, phone in hand, checking the time. Dorothy took a grocery bag from the kitchen. Brown paper, sturdy handles. She placed the framed photographs from her nightstand inside. Her and Walter on their wedding day, June 14th, 1976, standing in front of the Methodist Church on Main Street with the afternoon light catching the lace collar of her borrowed dress. Walter holding newborn Lorraine, his face caught somewhere between terror and wonder, his calloused hands cradling the baby like she was made of blown glass. Her mother's portrait in its small oval frame, sepia-toned, taken in a studio in Richmond when her mother was younger than Lorraine was now. Walter's watch was already on her wrist. She added her reading glasses. The cardigan she had knitted herself 6 winters ago, cable knit, navy blue, with wooden buttons she had sewn on by hand. A tube of arthritis cream that she rubbed into her knuckles every night before bed. And her wallet. Inside the wallet were $15.05, a 10, a 5, and the nickel from the movie theater in 1974. 74 years of living, and everything she could carry weighed less than a bag of groceries. Lorraine walked her to the front door. Mitch was already gone. He had taken his car and left while Dorothy was still packing, which told her everything she needed to know about how much of this he could stand to watch. The door closed behind her. The deadbolt turned. Dorothy heard it from the porch. That particular sound, metal sliding into metal, the sound of a lock engaging on the other side of a door that used to be yours. She stood on the front walk of 318 Magnolia Lane and looked at the house. White clapboard, black shutters. The porch Walter rebuilt twice because the first time the joists were not level enough to satisfy him. Even though no one else could tell the difference, the magnolia in the front yard was the one she had planted the spring Lorraine was born. 46 years of growth. Its highest branches reached past the second-floor windows now, and in spring its white blossoms would fill the yard with a sweetness so thick you could taste it from the sidewalk. But this was October, and the blossoms were gone, and the leaves were turning, and Dorothy was standing on the sidewalk with a paper bag and nowhere to go. $15.05. That is what a lifetime came down to. She stood there long enough for Mrs. Pemberton next door to look out her kitchen window, see Dorothy on the sidewalk with a paper bag, and pull the curtain shut. Long enough for the automatic sprinklers across the street to kick on and fill the silence with the sound of water hitting grass. Then Dorothy turned and walked. Down Magnolia to Main Street, past the Methodist church where she and Walter had been married 48 years ago, in front of 14 guests and a borrowed organist who played slightly too fast because she had another wedding at 3. Past Rosalind's diner where they had eaten Sunday breakfast for longer than she could count. Scrambled eggs and rye toast for Walter. Pancakes with strawberries for Dorothy. The same booth by the window every week for 30 years until the morning Walter was not there to sit in it anymore. Past the hardware store with its hand-painted window signs. Past the bank. Past the bench outside the post office where Walter used to sit and talk to whoever happened by, because Walter talked to everyone slowly and patiently and gave each person the same steady attention he gave a piece of wood he was about to cut. October in Cedarville, Virginia, was usually beautiful. The maples along Main Street had turned gold and scarlet, and dry leaves scattered across the sidewalk and cracked under her orthopedic shoes. Any other morning, Dorothy would have called it lovely. Today, the beauty felt like an insult. The world kept turning, bright and indifferent, and she was carrying her whole life in a paper bag. She kept walking because sitting meant stopping, and stopping meant deciding, and she was not ready for that. She passed the library and thought about the bench out front but kept going. Past the florist, past the barber shop, past the spot where Walter had proposed to her on a park bench in 1975, 2 months before the wedding, with a ring he had made himself from a silver dollar his grandfather gave him. The ring was still on her finger. Lorraine had not asked for it. She would have said no. Walter had been a quiet man. 31 years at the lumberyard, never once complaining about the hours or the sawdust that settled permanently into the creases of his hands. He came home every evening, smelling like pine resin and machine oil, kissed Dorothy on the forehead, and disappeared into the garage until dinner. She always assumed the projects were small: birdhouses for the backyard, cutting boards for the neighbors at Christmas, a set of wooden spoons he gave her for their 30th anniversary that she used every day, or had, until Lorraine moved them to a box in the garage. He died on a Tuesday afternoon in October 3 years ago, almost to the week. Cardiac arrest at the kitchen table. Dorothy had been at the grocery store. She came home to flashing lights and a house full of strangers in uniforms who spoke to her gently and called her ma'am. The paramedic said it was quick. She was never sure if that was supposed to help. Lorraine arrived the next day from her apartment in the city wearing a dark blazer and a face that looked more worried than grieved. Within 2 weeks, she and Mitch had moved in. Just until things settle, Lorraine had said. You should not be alone, Mom. Things did not settle. They shifted. Mitch handled the paperwork, the bills, the insurance claims. Lorraine redecorated the living room, then the kitchen, then the master bedroom. Room by room, the house Dorothy and Walter had filled with 48 years of living was emptied and refilled with someone else's taste. Dorothy said nothing because she thought she was being gracious, accommodating, reasonable. By the time she realized what was really happening, the locks had already been changed. Main Street ended where the shops gave way to gas stations and gravel lots and chain-link fencing. On the right, a wide parking area opened up beside rows of low corrugated metal buildings. A sign at the entrance read, Cedarville Self-Storage. Below it, a red banner on white vinyl. Auction today. A crowd had gathered near the first row of units. 15, maybe 20 people. Most held paper coffee cups. Some carried folding chairs under their arms. A man in a cowboy hat stood on a plastic crate, adjusting a portable microphone that popped and whined. He said something about the weather, and the crowd laughed. Dorothy did not know what a storage auction was. She had never thought about what happened to things people left behind. But the group was loud and warm and alive. People elbowing each other, trading jokes, arguing about who owed who a coffee. And after 3 hours of walking alone through a town that had looked right through her, the noise felt like shelter. She stood at the edge of the group, grocery bag pressed to her chest, and watched. The auctioneer worked fast, cracking jokes between bids. Each unit door was rolled up just enough for the crowd to peer inside, then the numbers started flying. Unit 1 held cardboard boxes and a broken exercise bike. $40. The buyer opened the first box, found nothing but water-damaged textbooks, and the crowd erupted. Unit 2 had mildewed furniture and a stack of bald tires. $55. Unit 3 was packed floor to ceiling with sealed plastic bins, and 2 men drove the price to $320, jabbing fingers at each other while the auctioneer egged them on. The regulars all knew each other. A heavy-set man in a plaid jacket bid on nearly everything and won most of it. A woman with a clipboard tracked each sale in tidy columns. Near the back of the group, a tall man in canvas overalls stood with his arms folded, watching everything with an unhurried patience that reminded Dorothy of Walter in a way she could not quite name. Something about the way he stood, still, attentive, giving the world time to show him what it had. He bid once early, a rolling toolbox and a pair of mechanics lifts. $70, paid in cash. He loaded them into his pickup and came back and resumed his position at the edge of the crowd. Units kept selling. The crowd thinned as winners loaded their trucks. By the time the auctioneer reached the back row, only 8 or 9 people remained. Unit 14, the auctioneer called out. Last one today, folks. 5 by 10. Climate controlled. Delinquent 18 months. Let us have a look. The facility manager cut the padlock with bolt cutters and gripped the bottom rail. The roll-up door was dented and stiff, its tracks rusted from disuse. He kicked the base, pulled hard, and the door groaned upward on reluctant rollers before stopping halfway. Inside was dark. The unit faced north, away from the afternoon sun, and the overhead bulb had burned out. From the entrance, nothing was visible but shadow and the vague shapes of things nobody could make out. "Cannot see a thing," someone said. "Probably empty," said another. 25 to start, the auctioneer said. "Climate-controlled mystery unit. This is where the fun is, folks. Who wants it?" No hands. The heavy-set man was strapping bungee cords. The clipboard woman was walking to her car. The tall man in overalls gave the dark opening a long look and turned away. 25. Anybody? 15. 10 if somebody wants to get adventurous. Nothing. Tired chuckles. The auctioneer shrugged and started to wave the unit off. Dorothy raised her hand. She would try to explain it afterward and never quite manage. Maybe it was because the unit reminded her of herself, sitting in the dark, passed over, waiting for someone to bother looking. Maybe it was because she had $15 and no reason left to save them, and nowhere to spend them anyway. Maybe she was just tired of walking. 15, she said. Her voice was thin in the open air. The auctioneer stopped mid-gesture. The remaining bidders glanced at her, at the grocery bag, at her orthopedic shoes, at the cardigan draped over her arm. Someone near the trucks let out a short, dismissive laugh. $15 from the lady. Do I hear 20? Silence. Going once, going twice. Sold. Unit 14. $15. The facility manager handed her a receipt in a new padlock still in its plastic packaging. "All yours," he said. His tone was neither kind nor unkind. 30 days before fees start. The last stragglers drifted toward the parking lot. The tall man in overalls paused beside his truck, watching Dorothy from across the gravel. He did not drive away. Dorothy set her grocery bag on the concrete. She walked to Unit 14, gripped the bottom of the roll-up door with both hands, and hauled it the rest of the way up. The tracks screamed. The door slammed open at the top. Afternoon light flooded the space. A rocking chair sat just inside the entrance, positioned facing outward, catching the sun on its curved back. Cherry wood. Hand rubbed to a finish so deep the grains seemed to glow from inside the wood. The armrests were worn smooth along their edges, shaped by years of careful sanding until they felt like water under your palms. Behind it, larger shapes emerged from the dimness. A long table with turned legs, a pair of tall bookshelves, a wide dresser with brass pulls. Canvas drop cloths covered some of the bigger pieces. Along the left wall, pegboard panels held rows of tools on labeled hooks, organized by type and size. Chisels, hand planes, coping saws, marking gauges, each one clean, each one in its place. It was not storage. It was a workshop. Someone had built beautiful things here, or kept what they built with the care of a person who loved what their hands had made. The auctioneer, halfway to his van, turned around. 2 men loading a truck stopped and stared. The tall man in overalls opened his door and stepped back out onto the gravel. Nobody said a word. Dorothy did not notice any of them. She was looking at the rocking chair. She stepped forward and knelt on the concrete, her left knee protesting the way it always did, a sharp complaint that settled into a dull, familiar ache. She ran her fingers along the joint where the armrest met the backrest. A hand-cut dovetail, tight and clean. No nails, no screws, no filler. The grain matched perfectly across the seam, cut from the same board and reassembled so the wood flowed unbroken around the corner. She knew this joint. She had seen it 1,000 times. In the kitchen cabinets Walter built when they first moved into the house on Magnolia. In the bookshelves he made for the living room. In the jewelry box he carved for their 20th anniversary, the one that sat on her dresser for 28 years until Lorraine replaced it with a decorative tray from a catalog. This was Walter's work. Her husband had been dead for 3 years. She had spent all of them believing his garage evenings produced birdhouses and cutting boards and small wooden spoons. Small things for small occasions. She never pushed him to show her because he always seemed shy about his projects, and she respected that quiet because it was their way. He built. She sewed. They lived side by side, close but never intrusive. She had never imagined this. Dorothy lowered herself into the rocking chair. The springs creaked once and settled. The seat curved against her back as if it had been waiting for her. The wood was cool and smooth under her palms, sanded so fine she could feel nothing but the warmth of the finish. She sat there while the light moved across the concrete floor and the shadows lengthened and the afternoon deepened around her, and she held the arms of a chair her dead husband had built in secret, and she did not move. The facility closed at 6. The last car left the lot. The manager padlocked the front gate. He did not walk the rows to check each unit. He locked the gate, climbed into his sedan, and drove off. Dorothy watched through the gap between the buildings until his taillights disappeared down Route 12. Then she pulled the roll-up door down from the inside, leaving a gap of about 6 inches at the bottom for air, and she was alone. She spread her navy cardigan on the concrete floor beside the rocking chair, set the grocery bag of photographs under her head, and lay down. The concrete was cold. October in Virginia drops into the mid-40s at night, and a storage unit has no insulation, no heat, no blankets. She pulled her knees up toward her chest the way she had not slept since she was a child, trying to make herself small enough to hold her own warmth. Her left hip ached against the hard floor. Her lower back seized within the first hour and did not release. The air smelled like linseed oil and old sawdust and cold metal. She was 74 years old, lying on the concrete floor of a storage unit, and not a single person in the world knew where she was. She thought about Walter, about the way he smelled when he came home from the lumberyard, pine resin and machine oil, the way he kissed her on the forehead every evening before disappearing into the garage. She had always assumed the projects were small. She had been wrong about that for longer than she knew. Sometime after midnight, she stopped trying to sleep. She sat up in the dark and leaned against the rocking chair and held Walter's watch against her ear, even though it had not ticked in 3 years. The glass was cold against her skin. She held it there anyway. Some sounds do not need to be real to be heard. Morning came gray and slow. The manager arrived at 7, found the gap under the roll-up door, and discovered Dorothy sitting inside the unit on the concrete with her grocery bag in her lap. "Ma'am, this is a storage facility. You cannot stay here overnight." "I know," Dorothy said. She stood. Her knees protested. Her hip was stiff. Her back was a solid wall of ache from shoulders to tailbone. "I will go." She walked back into town. No money now. Not even the $15. She had the nickel, but the nickel was not currency. It was memory. The library opened at 9. It was warm inside and free, and nobody asked you to leave if you sat quietly. Dorothy sat at a reading table near the window and stayed until noon. She used the public computer to search for homeless resources in Cedarville, Virginia. The nearest shelter was 41 miles away. No car, no bus fare, no phone. She sat at the library table and stared at the screen and felt the weight of her situation settle onto her shoulders like a physical thing. 74 years old, no money, no home, no phone, no car, no family that wanted her. A bag of photographs, a nickel, a dead man's watch, and a storage unit full of furniture she could not eat or sleep on or trade for a meal. In the early afternoon, she walked to Rosalind's diner. She and Walter had eaten there every Sunday for 30 years. Rosalind knew her face, her order, the booth she preferred. Dorothy walked in and sat at the counter and asked for a glass of water because water was free. Rosalind set the glass down and looked at her. "You all right, Dot?" Before Dorothy could answer, the door opened behind her. Mitch walked in. Lunch hour, work clothes, loosened tie, jacket over his arm. He saw Dorothy at the counter and his face went still. There were 4 other people in the diner, a couple in a booth by the window, a man reading a newspaper at the far end of the counter, Rosalind behind the register. Mitch did not lower his voice. He spoke at a volume that carried the way a man speaks when he wants witnesses to his reasonableness. Dorothy, I told you, you need to be somewhere with people who can take care of you. You cannot just wander around town like this. It makes things difficult. For everyone. Dorothy set her water glass on the counter. She looked at Mitch. She looked at the other people in the diner who had all stopped what they were doing and were watching. She looked at Rosalind, who stood behind the register with an expression that was trying to decide what it wanted to be. Dorothy did not say a word. She stood, picked up her grocery bag, and walked out of the diner. She did not give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She gave him silence, which was worse, because silence leaves a man standing in front of witnesses with nothing to push against. She stood on the sidewalk of Main Street in the October sun and felt something she had not felt before. Not sadness. She knew sadness. She had carried it for 3 years like a stone in her chest. This was different. This was the feeling of being erased while you were still alive, of standing in a town where you had lived for 45 years, where you had shopped and worshipped and raised a child and buried a husband, and being told by a man who had married into your family 6 years ago that your presence was an inconvenience. That was the lowest point. Standing on Main Street with dry leaves blowing across her orthopedic shoes and the taste of humiliation in her mouth like copper. And for one long, terrible moment, she did not know if she had the strength to take another step. What would you do in her situation? Would you fight or would you walk away? Tell me in the comments below. And keep listening, because what happens next surprised everyone who underestimated her, including Dorothy herself. She stood there long enough for the shadows to shift. Then something in her settled. Not hope. Not yet. Something older than hope. Something closer to stubbornness. The same thing that had made her sew through the night to finish Lorraine's prom dress. The same thing that made her work double shifts at Henderson's so her daughter could have braces and school trips and a used car on her 16th birthday. She had been bending for other people her entire life. She was done bending. She walked to the bench outside the post office. Walter's bench. She sat down with her grocery bag on her lap and watched the street empty as the shops closed for the day. At 4:30, a blue pickup truck pulled to the curb. Rust on the wheel wells. A toolbox bolted to the bed. The engine idled for a moment, then shut off. The driver's door opened. A tall man in canvas overalls stepped out and walked around the front of the truck. He was older than she had guessed from a distance at the auction. Late 60s, close-cropped gray hair, thick forearms marked with old burn scars, the kind welders carry. His face was weathered, his expression careful and still. "You need a ride somewhere?" he asked. She almost said no. The reflex came before the thought. But she had no money, no phone, no car, and no key to the lock on her own front door. "I do not have anywhere to go," Dorothy said. It was the first time she had spoken it out loud, and saying it made it real. The man nodded once, slowly, giving the problem proper weight. "Name is Hollis," he said. "Hollis Dawes. My wife Bess will have dinner on by now. We have a spare room." He paused. "Clean sheets and everything." "You do not know me," Dorothy said. "I know you have been sitting on a bench all afternoon with a paper bag and nowhere to go," Hollis said. "That is enough to start with." He opened the passenger door and waited for her to climb in. They drove through Cedarville in silence. Hollis kept one hand on the wheel and his window cracked an inch, and the only sound was the engine and the whisper of October air through the gap. The Dawes house was a one-story brick ranch at the end of a cul-de-sac, set back behind a row of boxwoods that needed trimming. Hollis pulled into the driveway, and Dorothy saw a woman on the front steps wiping her hands on a dish towel. Shorter than Hollis by a foot, round-faced, reading glasses pushed up into her gray hair. Hollis walked up to her. They spoke quietly for a moment, heads close. The woman looked past Hollis toward the truck, toward Dorothy sitting in the passenger seat with a grocery bag on her lap, and her expression shifted from curious to decided. She came down the steps and opened Dorothy's door. "Bess Dawes," she said. "Come inside. Pot roast is almost done, and I made too much, which is what I say every night, and it is always true." The kitchen smelled like rosemary and slow-cooked beef and bread warming in the oven. Bess set a place at the table without asking whether Dorothy was hungry, poured a glass of water, put butter out beside the bread. Hollis washed his hands at the sink and sat down across from Dorothy. Nobody spoke about why she was there. They just ate. And for the first time in 24 hours, Dorothy felt the grip in her chest loosen enough to breathe. After dinner, Bess led Dorothy down a short hallway to a bedroom at the back of the house. Small and clean, a twin bed, a reading lamp, a window onto the backyard. On the dresser sat a model warship, carefully painted in navy gray, and a baseball trophy with the year 2004 engraved on its base. "Bathroom is next door," Bess said. "Towels on the shelf. You need anything, just holler." She did not explain the model warship or the trophy. She did not have to. Dorothy understood. This room had belonged to someone who was not coming back, and opening it to a stranger was not a small thing. "Thank you," Dorothy said. "You are welcome," Bess said, and closed the door gently behind her. Dorothy sat on the edge of the bed. The sheets smelled like detergent and cedar. Crickets sang in the boxwoods. Somewhere down the hall, she could hear Hollis and Bess talking, low and warm, the sound of two people who had been talking to each other for a long time and had not run out of things to say. She lay in the dark and slept more deeply than she had in months. Hollis drove her back to the storage facility at 8 the next morning. He brought 2 coffees in paper cups and a flashlight, though the October sun was already strong enough to reach the back of Unit 14 when Dorothy rolled the door up. "I want to go through everything," she said, "all of it." Hollis nodded. He understood the value of knowing exactly what you had before deciding what to do next. They worked through the unit piece by piece. Hollis handled the heavy furniture while Dorothy uncovered it. The dining table first. She pulled the canvas drop cloth off and her breath caught. Solid walnut, hand-carved cabriole legs, a finish so deep it held her reflection. The bookshelves. Matching cherry with adjustable shelves and glass-fronted doors that opened and closed with the precise resistance of well-fitted joinery. A blanket chest in quarter-sawn oak with a magnolia branch carved into the lid. Dorothy traced the carving with her fingertip. Every petal, every leaf. The magnolia tree in the front yard of 318 Magnolia Lane rendered in oak by her husband's hands. A writing desk with dovetailed drawers. A hall table with tapered legs. A child's step stool with edges rounded smooth. 6 shaker-style dining chairs with woven rush seats, each one identical, which meant Walter had built jigs and templates to ensure consistency, which meant this was not a hobby. This was a calling. All signed on the underside with 2 letters burned into the wood, W.C. Walter Calloway. Hollis crouched beside the dining table and examined the joinery where the apron met the leg. He ran his thumbnail along the joint and shook his head slowly. "Your husband could have charged real money for work like this. This is better than what comes out of most professional shops." "He worked at a lumber yard," Dorothy said. "That explains the wood selection," Hollis said. "Does not explain the craftsmanship." Near the back of the unit, half hidden behind the blanket chest, Dorothy found a small desk. Simple, clean lines, a fold-down front, 3 shallow drawers. She opened the top one. Inside was a sealed envelope, cream-colored, yellowed at the edges. A single word written across the front in handwriting she would have recognized from across a room. Dorothy. The D with its distinctive cross-stroke. The careful, unhurried print of a man who measured twice before he did anything, even writing a name on an envelope. She slid her finger under the flap and pulled out 3 sheets of lined paper filled front and back in Walter's small square hand. "If you are still here, thank you. The best part of this story is just beginning. Hit that like button to let the algorithm know this story deserves to be heard." Because what she found in that envelope changed everything. The first line read, "My Dorothy. If you are reading this, then I owe you an explanation in about 40 years of apologies for being so secretive." Dorothy sat down on the concrete floor, her back against the little desk, the grocery bag beside her, the rocking chair silhouetted against the afternoon light. Walter's handwriting filled 3 pages front and back, each line pressed firmly into the paper. "You probably found this letter in the top drawer of the little desk near the back wall." He wrote, "I built that desk last because I wanted it to be the thing you found first. I am not good with surprises, Dorothy. I planned this one for a decade, and I still do not know if I got it right." The ink was blue ballpoint, slightly faded. In a few spots where Walter had paused to think, The pen had left small dots of hesitation on the page. Here is what I should have told you a long time ago. After I retired from the yard, I rented this storage unit, 5 by 10, climate controlled, $240 a year. I told you I was going to the garage to work on small projects, and that part was true. Mostly. But the bigger pieces, the ones that took real space and real time, I brought here. I would drive over in the mornings after you left for Henderson's, or on Saturdays when you were at your quilting circle, and I would work until lunch. Then I would lock up, come home, and be sitting on the porch with my coffee by the time you got back. She could hear him. That was what undid her. She could hear his voice in every line, that slow, slightly formal cadence he used when he was explaining something he cared about. Patient, a little embarrassed to be talking so long. I started selling some of the pieces about 7 years back. Nothing grand. I would load a table or a set of chairs into the truck and take them to the flea market on the first Saturday of the month. Then a woman who runs an antique shop in town started buying from me regular. Lenore, I think her name is. She would sell them for 3 or 4 times what I charged her, and we were both happy with the arrangement. The money went into a fireproof safe in the back of this unit. I did not put it in the bank because I did not want it showing up on our statements and having to explain it before I was ready. I was not saving for myself. I was saving for us, for our 50th anniversary. Dorothy looked up from the letter, the rocking chair framed in the open doorway, afternoon light pooling on its smooth armrests, the cherry wood glowing warm in the sun. Here is what I was going to do. On the morning of our 50th, I was going to drive you out here, roll up that door, and show you everything. Every table, every shelf, every chair I built with my own hands. And then I was going to hand you the savings and tell you this. We do not need Lorraine Dorothy. We do not need her help or her opinions or her plans for our lives. We have enough. We have this. Dorothy set the pages down on her knee. Her hands trembled. I know you think I just putter around in the garage making birdhouses. And I do make birdhouses. But I also made you a dining table that seats 8 because I always thought we should have one big enough for company, even if we never get around to inviting anyone. And I made bookshelves because you love your books and you deserve better than those wobbly particle board things from the department store. And I made you a rocking chair because you told me once, a long time ago, that your mother had one on her porch when you were a girl. Cherrywood. You said you used to sit in it and watch the fireflies. She remembered. She had said it once, maybe 20 years ago, sitting on the porch swing on a humid July evening. My mama had a rocking chair on her porch, cherrywood, and I would sit in it for hours watching the fireflies come up from the grass. She said it once, in passing, on an ordinary evening, and Walter remembered, and Walter built it. He did not need her to see him to keep loving her. He just kept building. The last paragraph was shorter, the handwriting slightly less steady, the pen pressing harder. I do not know when you will find this. I paid up the rent on the unit through next year, and if something happens to me before our anniversary, I figure the unit will go to auction eventually and somehow you will end up here. That is the plan anyway. It is not a great plan. But I was never good at plans, Dorothy. I was good at building things. So that is what I did. I just kept building. I love you. I should have said it more. He signed it Walter Robert Calloway. Below the signature in smaller letters, check the safe. Combination is our anniversary. The date, not the year. But the safe was only one part of what Walter left behind. Because he did not just leave her money. He left her something that could undo everything Lorraine and Mitch had done. Something they never saw coming, because they never thought to look. The next morning, Dorothy knelt beside the fireproof safe. Dark gray steel, bolted to a metal plate that was lag-bolted to the concrete slab. She placed her fingers on the combination dial and turned it slowly. 0614, June 14th. The day she and Walter stood in the Methodist church and promised each other 50 years. They got 48. The handle turned. The heavy door swung open. On the top shelf, bundled cash. Banded stacks of 20s and 50s, each rubber banded separately with a small slip of paper, noting the amount in Walter's handwriting. Dorothy pulled them out one by one. Hollis counted without being asked. $52,600. Dorothy stared at the bills spread on the concrete. Walter had earned $12.60 an hour at the lumberyard. This pile represented years of quiet industry. Furniture built and sold piece by piece, dollar by dollar, stacked in a fireproof box on Route 12 while she hemmed trousers at Henderson's and believed he was sanding birdhouses. Below the cash, on the bottom shelf, sat three items. The first was a leather-bound journal, thick and soft from years of handling. Walter's handwriting filled every page. Dates, measurements, wood species, finish formulas, pencil sketches with dimensions marked in fractions. A complete record of everything he built over a decade. The second was a document, a property deed, but not the one Mitch had waved on the staircase. This was the original, filed with the county in 1981. And at the top, in the county recorder's precise typeface, were two names, Walter R. Calloway and Dorothy A. Calloway. Joint tenants with right of survivorship. Both names. The house belonged to both of them. When Walter died, it should have passed entirely to Dorothy. Automatically. That was what joint tenancy meant. That was the law. The document Mitch had filed was a fraud. The third item was a wooden box, small enough to hold in one hand, cherry wood, dovetailed corners, a tiny brass clasp. Inside, on a square folded velvet, lay a necklace. Wooden beads hand-turned on a lathe, each one slightly different in grain and color, strung on a delicate silver chain. The last two beads were rough and unfinished, still waiting for the sanding that would bring them smooth. Walter had run out of time. Dorothy closed the box and held it in her lap. Then she picked up the deed. The house I was locked out of yesterday morning. Her voice was very steady. It is on this deed, both my name and Walter's. Joint tenancy. Hollis looked at the deed, at the two names, at the county seal. Your son-in-law filed a different deed, he said. It was not a question. He told me I signed a transfer. I signed papers, but I did not understand what they were. Hollis was quiet for a long moment. You know what this means, he said. It means my son-in-law stole my house, she said. Did you expect that? Neither did she. If this moment gave you chills, let me know in the comments. Just one word. How do you feel right now? Because this story is far from over. Hollis did not try to soften it or explain it away. He let the truth have its weight. I know a lawyer, he said. Eugene Pratt. Good man, honest. Mostly retired, but he still takes cases when they matter. This one matters. That afternoon, Hollis drove Dorothy to Ridgeline Antiques on Main Street, a narrow storefront with a green awning. The bell chimed when they pushed through the door. The shop was deeper than it was wide, furniture along both walls, the air smelling of lemon polish and old fabric. A woman stood near the back counter pricing a set of Depression-era plates, slight, with short silver hair and rectangular glasses. Lenore Ashby, Morning Hollis. What did you bring me this time? Not mine. He nodded toward Dorothy. Hers. Dorothy set a pair of candle stands on the counter. Lenore looked at them. Then she stopped what she was doing entirely. Put down her pricing gun, removed her glasses, leaned close to the joinery. Where did you get these? A storage unit. My husband built them. Lenore turned one candle stand over and went still when she found the mark. W.C. Your husband is W.C., she said. Was, Dorothy said. Walter Calloway. He has been gone a while now. Lenore pressed both palms flat on the counter. Come with me. She led Dorothy through a curtained doorway into a back office. Filing cabinets, binders labeled by year. Lenore pulled down 3 and spread papers across the desk. Sales receipts, photographs, customer feedback cards. I have been selling WC pieces for 7 years. A man walked in one morning with a side table in the back of his truck. No card, no website, just work clothes and a table. I looked at the joinery and bought it on the spot. She fanned out the receipts, dozens of pieces, each documented with a photograph and a sale price. $300 for a candle stand, $800 for a nightstand, $1,200 for a blanket chest. I never knew his full name. He just told me to call him Walter. Quiet man. Came in every month or two with a new piece, always wrapped in moving blankets, always perfect. I have regulars across 3 counties who call me whenever a new WC piece comes in. He had a reputation, Lenore said quietly. A real one. People knew his work even if they did not know him. Dorothy picked up a feedback card. A woman from the next county had written, "The nightstand is beautiful. You can feel the care in every joint. Whoever WC is, please tell them they made something that will outlast all of us. Walter had built a legacy she never knew existed, famous in his small and careful way, and he never once mentioned it at dinner. Hollis drove Dorothy to Eugene Pratt's office that afternoon, a converted Victorian on Birch Street with a creaking porch and a brass nameplate. Pratt was tall and angular, with wire-rimmed glasses, in a quiet, deliberate manner. He had known Walter from the Elks Lodge. "Show me both deeds," Pratt said. Dorothy placed them side by side, the original from '81 and the quitclaim deed Mitch had filed. Pratt examined them in silence. "The signature on this transfer, is this your signature, Dorothy?" "No. You are certain. I have been signing my name my whole life, Eugene. That is not how I make my D. I have never once looped my S. Whoever signed that tried, but they did not get it right. This is forgery. Under joint tenancy with right of survivorship, when Walter passed, the property transferred to you automatically. There is no legal mechanism by which Mitch could have acquired title without your genuine informed consent. Combined with the forged signature, this is fraud. Under state law, it also qualifies as elder abuse. There are criminal penalties." "What do you want to do?" Pratt asked. "I want my house back." That afternoon, while Hollis cataloged the larger pieces at the storage facility, Bess drove Dorothy past the house on Magnolia. Dorothy did not want to go inside. She wanted to see one thing: pull past the driveway, so I can see the garage. Bess eased the car to the curb. The garage door was up. Dorothy looked inside and went very still. The garage was empty, not rearranged, empty. Walter's workbench, the one he built with his own father in 1970. The bench where he taught Lorraine to grip a coping saw and sand a piece of pine until it was smooth enough to hold against your cheek, was gone. The pegboard was bare, the shelf stripped clean. "He sold it," Dorothy said, her voice flat. Mitch sold all of Walter's things: the workbench, the tools, the birdhouses and cutting boards, and the unfinished jewelry box that was supposed to be her Christmas present the year he died. Gone. 40 years of sawdust and patient craft cleared out in an afternoon. "He did not just steal the house," Dorothy said. "He erased Walter." Bess reached across the console and put her hand over Dorothy's hand and held it there. Two women sitting in a parked car looking at an empty garage where something irreplaceable used to be. "Take me back to Hollis's," Dorothy said. She did not speak on the drive home. She stared out the window and felt the grief she had been carrying settle and harden into something else. By the time Bess pulled into the driveway, the sadness was not gone. But it had company now. Purpose stood beside it, solid and clear. Pratt's letter went out the next morning. Certified mail, 2 pages. The original deed, the forged signature, the request to vacate and restore title, or face criminal prosecution. 2 days passed. No response from Mitch. On the third evening, Dorothy was in Bess's kitchen, drying dishes, when headlights swept across the front windows and a car pulled into the driveway too fast. Hollis set down his newspaper and stood. The doorbell rang, then a knock. Hard, 3 times. Hollis opened the front door. Mitch stood on the porch in the yellow light. Behind him, half a step back, stood a woman in a dark blazer, leather briefcase. Patricia Voss, attorney. "I need to talk to Dorothy," Mitch said. "She is here," Hollis said. He did not move from the doorway. "Whether she wants to talk to you is her call." The attorney spoke directly to Hollis. "We are here to discuss a resolution. My client believes there has been a misunderstanding about the property transfer." Dorothy walked past Hollis onto the porch. The October air was sharp. Mitch stood under the porch light with his hands in his pockets and his jaw working. Lorraine was not with him. Dorothy noticed that. "When did you sell Walter's workbench?" she asked. Mitch blinked. "What?" "Walter's tools. His workbench. When did you get rid of them? That was just old stuff. We needed the space for..." "That workbench was built by Walter and his father in 1970. My husband learned to use a hand plane on that bench. He taught Lorraine on it, and you sold it." The attorney started to speak. Hollis shook his head once. The attorney closed her mouth. "Dorothy," Mitch said, "that is not what this is about." "There is nothing left to talk about," Dorothy said. "Tell your lawyer to call mine." She turned and walked inside. Hollis closed the door, but Mitch was not finished. What he did next nearly destroyed everything. We are approaching the moment when everything changes. If you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. You do not want to miss what happens next. 5 days after Pratt sent the demand letter, instead of responding with a settlement, Mitch's attorney filed a motion with the county court, not a defense of the property transfer. Something worse, a petition to declare Dorothy Calloway mentally incompetent, incapable of managing her own affairs, unfit to make legal decisions. The petition cited her age, cited the stove incident, cited unspecified memory lapses, and it requested that the court appoint Mitchell Bryce as Dorothy's legal guardian. If the court agreed, Dorothy would lose more than the house. She would lose the right to make decisions about her own life, her finances, her medical care, her freedom. A 74-year-old woman who had worked and raised a child and managed a household for half a century would be placed under the legal control of the man who had forged her name and stolen her home. Pratt called Dorothy into his office and told her with his hands folded on the desk, "They are not fighting for the house, Dorothy. They are fighting for you. If the court declares you incompetent, every piece of evidence we have becomes irrelevant. You cannot file a lawsuit if you cannot legally speak for yourself. Can they do that? They can file. Whether they can win is another matter. But we need to take this seriously. I need your medical records, everything, a statement from your doctor, and I need you to understand that this is going to be harder than I told you it would be." Dorothy looked at the journal in her lap. Walter's sketches, his notes on grain direction and drying times, the careful record of a meticulous and organized mind. She thought about her own mind, sharp enough to remember every medication she took, sharp enough to recognize a forged signature, sharp enough to understand exactly what her son-in-law was trying to do. "Get the records," she said. "Call Dr. Whelan and Eugene. Yes, I am not incompetent, and they are going to lose." Pratt contacted Dr. Whelan, Dorothy's physician for 15 years. Whelan's response was immediate. He provided a written statement confirming no signs of cognitive impairment, no dementia, no memory disorders, medication compliance documented and consistent. She was, in Whelan's assessment, as mentally sharp as most of his patients 30 years younger. Pratt also retained a forensic handwriting analyst from Richmond named Constance Trask. 74 cases on her record. She examined the quitclaim signature alongside 20 comparison samples from bank records, insurance forms, and letters. Her report was conclusive. The signature was a forgery. Pratt sent everything to Patricia Voss with a 2-paragraph cover letter. The first paragraph summarized the evidence. The second informed Ms. Voss that if the competency petition was not withdrawn within 72 hours, criminal charges would be filed and a complaint lodged with the state bar. The petition was withdrawn in 48 hours. Patricia Voss called Pratt the following morning. She asked what they wanted. The house restored, full restitution for everything sold from the property, a written acknowledgement of fraud. She said she would talk to her client. During those weeks of legal maneuvering, Dorothy spent her evenings in Eli's room reading Walter's journal page by page. She learned things about her husband she had never known. He experimented with Japanese joinery after watching videos at the library. He drove 2 hours to a sawmill in the next state because a plank of curly maple had grain that reminded him of river water. He built the child-sized rocking chair after their neighbor's granddaughter sat in the large one, and her feet could not reach the floor. He had been fully alive in that storage unit, more present than she had ever seen him at home, and she had missed all of it. But she was not missing it now. She read every page, studied every sketch, touched every joint he cut, and through the wood and the ink she learned her husband again. Dorothy had asked Bess once, carefully, about the boy in the photographs. Bess set down her sewing and looked at the model warship on the dresser for a long time. "Eli," she said, "our son, he was a Marine, 23 years old, Helmand Province, 2009. She said it the way you say something you have said many times before, the words worn smooth by repetition, but no lighter for it. Then she picked up her needle and resumed stitching. 2 women who had each lost someone they loved, sitting side by side, making something useful out of scraps. That was enough. That was more than enough. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after the confrontation on Hollis's porch. Pratt's office, neutral ground. Dorothy arrived early with Hollis, who waited in the truck with a thermos and the morning paper. Dorothy had made one request. She would sit across from Lorraine, not Mitch. Lorraine. Mitch was not permitted in the room. The conversation would be between mother and daughter. Pratt arranged the room simply. Desk pushed aside, two chairs facing each other across a small table, a pitcher of water and two glasses. Dorothy sat down and placed Walter's journal on the table beside her water glass. Lorraine arrived 12 minutes late. Footsteps on the porch stairs, hesitant and uneven. Pratt led her into the room. She looked different, thinner through the face, shadows under her eyes, a plain sweater and jeans. No jewelry, no polish on her nails. The composed woman who had stood in the kitchen doorway, with her arms folded, was gone. What sat down across from Dorothy was someone smaller, someone who had been sleeping badly and carrying something heavy for a long time. Lorraine, Pratt said, your attorney has reviewed the evidence and advised you to settle. Is that your understanding? Yes. Her voice smaller than Dorothy had ever heard it. I will let Dorothy begin. Dorothy looked at her daughter. I need to understand why, she said. We were drowning, Lorraine said. Mitch leveraged everything on two developments that went under when the market turned. Credit cards, a second mortgage, everything. She stopped, opened her mouth again. Mitch said the house was the only asset we could access. He said we would sell it and pay off the debts and get you something smaller. He said it would barely change anything for you. You forged my name on a legal document, Dorothy said. I know. You moved into my home. You redecorated every room. You sold your father's tools and his workbench and the birdhouses he left half-finished. And then you changed the locks and told me I needed to go to a facility. I know, Lorraine's voice cracked. I told myself it was temporary, that we would fix it, that we would set things right before you ever had to know. But the debt kept growing and Mitch kept planning, and you just let it happen. Lorraine pressed her palms against her eyes. When did Mitch sell your father's workbench? Dorothy asked. Lorraine went still. I do not know exactly. Mitch handled $80, Dorothy said. A man at the yard sale loaded it into the back of his truck and drove off. The bench your father and your grandfather built together in 1970. Your father learned to use a hand plane on that bench. He taught you to sand on it. You were 6 years old and he held your hands over the wood and showed you how to follow the grain. $80. Lorraine made a sound between a gasp and a sob. He sold everything in the garage in a single weekend. Tools, lumber, stain cans. $430 for a lifetime of work. He used it to make one credit card payment that did not even cover the minimum. The room was very still. Pratt's pen had stopped moving. Dad would have been so angry, Lorraine whispered. Your father would not have been angry, Dorothy said. He would have been heartbroken. There is a difference, Lorraine. A large one. Lorraine put her head down on the table. The sound that came from her was full and raw and ugly. The sound of a person understanding for the first time the exact dimensions of what they had destroyed. Then the rest of it came out. Mitch had controlled the finances for their entire marriage. 15 years. Lorraine had no separate bank account, no credit cards in her own name. Mitch decided what they spent, where they lived, who they saw. When Lorraine questioned him, he told her she did not understand money, that she would ruin them. When she pushed back, he withdrew into cold silence for days until she agreed. He told me if I did not go along with the plan for the house, he would leave, Lorraine said, and I would have nothing. No money, no home, no one. Dorothy looked at her daughter. 46 years old, sitting in a lawyer's office with her marriage collapsed and her fraud documented and her mother across the table. And Dorothy saw not a villain, not entirely. She saw a woman who had been slowly, carefully controlled for 15 years by a man who understood exactly how to make someone believe they had no choices. Not innocent. Lorraine had made choices. She chose to look away. She chose compliance over conscience, comfort over courage. But she had not chosen alone. The people who throw you away do not get to decide your worth, Dorothy said. She said it without raising her voice, without leaning forward, without any theater. She spoke it plainly because it was true and because Walter had taught her that truth does not need volume. Your father understood that. He spent a decade in a storage unit building beautiful things because he believed we were worth more than what other people decided for us. You threw me out with a grocery bag. You threw Walter's entire legacy away for less than $500. But I am sitting here because I found what he built. And what he built is worth more than anything you took. Lorraine lifted her head, her face swollen and streaked. I love you, Dorothy said. I loved you when you were a baby and I love you now. But love does not mean I have to forgive you today. Pratt outlined the terms. Title restored, restitution for everything sold, written acknowledgement of wrongdoing filed with the county court. Criminal charges deferred contingent on full compliance. Lorraine signed everything, without reading, without arguing. Mitch signed through Patricia Voss 3 days later, after Pratt informed her that criminal referral papers were already drafted. Within the week, Mitch filed for divorce and left Cedarville. Dorothy did not ask where he went. The title transfer was recorded on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, Dorothy A. Calloway was once again the sole legal owner of 318 Magnolia Lane. If this story has moved you, share it right now with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who needs to remember that their worth does not come with an expiration date. And keep listening, because this is not the end. This is where it begins. Hollis drove her to the house the following Monday. She asked him to wait in the truck. She stood on the front walk and looked at the house. It was the same house. The same white paint Walter had rolled on 2 coats every 5 years. The same shutters he had hung with a level and a patience that bordered on stubbornness. But the magnolia was bare now, stripped by November wind, its branches reaching upward like open hands against the gray sky. And the woman standing on the sidewalk was not the same woman who had been locked out 2 months ago. That woman had carried a grocery bag and $15 and no idea what was waiting for her in a storage unit on Route 12. This woman carried a deed and a key, and the quiet certainty that she had earned every inch of the ground she was standing on. Dorothy unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house smelled like scented candles and air freshener. Lorraine's taste filled every surface. The living room repainted a shade of gray Dorothy did not recognize. New couch. The bookshelves Walter built were still mounted to the wall, solid and level. But the books were gone, replaced by ceramic bowls and framed photographs of strangers. The kitchen had new curtains and new handles on the cabinets Walter made by hand. The drawer where Dorothy kept his wooden spoons was empty. Room by room, she moved through a house that was legally hers and felt nothing she recognized. The walls were the same. The floors were the same. The bones Walter built were still solid beneath the cosmetic changes, but everything that had made it theirs had been stripped away. She walked through the kitchen to the garage door, opened it, stepped inside. The concrete floor was clean, but in the corner where Walter's workbench had stood for 4 decades, the floor was darker than the surrounding concrete, stained deep by years of sawdust and linseed oil and wood shavings ground in by boots and drop tools. No amount of sweeping could remove it. Walter's mark was in the slab itself. Dorothy knelt and pressed her palm flat against the stain. The concrete was cold under her hand. She stayed there for a long time, her palm on the floor where Walter had stood and worked and quietly built things no one knew about. Then she opened Walter's journal to a page near the back. A sketch, a workshop, a proper one, drawn with dimensions and careful annotations. A full workbench along the far wall, tool storage on pegboard, a table saw station with a dust collection system he designed from a shop vacuum and flexible tubing, and on the right side, separated from the work area by a dotted line, a second space, 4 chairs, a small table, a chalkboard on the wall. Below the drawing, in his careful hand, a single word. Someday. Dorothy studied the sketch. Then she looked up at the empty garage around her. Bare walls, stained floor, dusty windows letting in the gray November light. She saw what Walter had seen, a place where beautiful things could be built, a place where someone could teach other people to build them, a place where the work of patient hands could continue long after the hands themselves were still. She closed the journal and stood. Her knees protested but held. It is mine, she told Hollis, but it needs work. What kind of work? She held up the journal, opened to the workshop sketch. This kind. The workshop came together through the winter, one careful piece at a time. Hollis rewired the garage in a single weekend, running proper overhead lighting and a dedicated 20-amp circuit for the table saw. He installed outlets every 4 feet along the bench wall. You can never have too many outlets in a shop, Dorothy. That is just physics. Gil Monahan, a widower in his mid-60s who had spent his career as a commercial plumber, volunteered to reframe the interior walls and hang fresh drywall. He showed up every morning at 7 with his own tools and his own coffee and worked until noon without being asked. He did not need thanks. He needed a place where his hands could still be useful, and nobody expected him to talk about the hole his wife had left. Bess scrubbed the windows and painted the walls a warm off-white that doubled the light in the room. Lenore contributed a display cabinet from the back of her shop, scratched along one side but structurally sound. Dorothy hung Walter's tools on the pegboard exactly as he had arranged them in the storage unit. Chisels above the bench, hand planes on the left wall, coping saws near the window where the morning light came in strongest. She placed the rocking chair beside the entrance, facing inward, where it could catch the sun and watch over the room. Nobody sat in it. It was not a rule. People just understood. She put a sign on the door, hand-lettered on a piece of cherry, the grain running smooth under clear lacquer. Calloway Workshop. Below that, in smaller letters. All are welcome. Hollis had suggested open to the public. Dorothy overruled him. Public sounds like a government building. Welcome sounds like a home. By late February, the space was ready. Workbench along the back wall. Tool storage organized by type and frequency of use. A table saw station with a dust collector Hollis built from a shop vacuum and flexible hose, exactly matching Walter's sketch. On the right side, where Walter had drawn the dotted line, Dorothy set up 4 folding chairs around a small table. A teaching space, a place to sit and talk and look at plans before picking up a tool. The first student arrived on a Tuesday morning, brought by a caseworker who knew Bess. Carlos Rivera was 17, 4th foster placement, close-cropped hair, a habit of crossing his arms whenever anyone spoke to him. He stood in the doorway, with his shoulders drawn up and his expression closed, and said nothing for the first 20 minutes. Dorothy did not push. She set a block of pine on the workbench, placed a sheet of 80 grit sandpaper beside it, and said, "Sand until it is smooth. Both sides. Both ends. Take your time." Carlos sanded. Dorothy worked beside him, planing a piece of maple, letting the rhythm of the tool and the smell of fresh shavings fill the silence between them. She did not ask him about school or his foster parents or his feelings. She asked him to sand a block of wood, and he did. By the end of the hour, the pine was smooth on all 6 sides. Carlos held it up and turned it under the light. "Now what?" "Now you learn to measure." Tammy Winslow joined in March, 36, single mother of 2 boys, working the night shift at the distribution center outside town. She had seen Lenore's display of WC pieces at Ridgeline Antiques and asked who built them. Lenore gave her Dorothy's number. Tammy learned fast, steady hands, a natural eye for proportion, the patience that comes from working nights and raising children alone. Within 2 weeks, she built a small shelf unit. The joints were visible and one shelf sat slightly higher than the other, but it was solid and it was hers. She carried it to her car with both arms and a look on her face that Dorothy recognized. The look of someone holding something real for the first time. "My boys need bookshelves. They have been stacking their library books on the floor. Then you know what to build next." On a morning in early April, Dorothy stood behind Carlos at the workbench and watched him attempt his first mortise joint. He had been coming Tuesdays and Thursdays for 6 weeks, and his patience, which started near 0, had stretched enough to carry him through 30 focused minutes before frustration set in. His arms had filled out from the work. The crossed arm posture had softened into something closer to attention. The chisel slipped. The mortise wall crumbled on one side. Carlos pulled the chisel back and stared at the damage. "I messed it up." Dorothy leaned over and examined the cut. "You rushed the last pass. You felt the wood resist and pushed harder instead of adjusting your angle. So it is ruined. It is practice." She set a fresh piece of poplar beside the first one. "Mark your lines. Then cut slowly enough that you can feel what the grain is doing. Wood does not talk. It does if you pay attention. Hardwood pushes back across the grain. Soft wood gives too easy and splinters if you force it. Every board is different. Your job is to listen." Carlos picked up the chisel again, measured, marked his lines with a pencil and a steel square. Then he cut slowly, his jaw set, his breathing even, the chisel moving in shallow, controlled passes. The mortise came out clean. He did not smile, but his shoulders dropped and the hard set of his mouth loosened and he held the joint up and turned it in the light. Better. How many times did your husband mess up before he got good at this? Dorothy thought about Walter's journal, the early entries documenting every failure alongside every success, a chair leg that split during turning, a tabletop that warped, an entire bookshelf he took apart and rebuilt because the proportions felt wrong by a quarter inch. Every time he tried something new, the difference was he kept going. Her mother used to say the same thing when she taught Dorothy to sew at 6 years old. Check your seam before you cut. Walter lived by it at the workbench. And now Dorothy was passing it to a 17-year-old boy who had never been taught that patience was a form of love. The workshop filled slowly, the way good things do. Hollis came every Tuesday with sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, ham and Swiss, yellow mustard, no lettuce, because Hollis did not believe in lettuce on a sandwich. He would stand behind whoever was working, arms folded, watching for a while before offering one precise suggestion that was always right. He never asked to be thanked, and he never sat in Walter's rocking chair. Bess came Wednesday evenings with fabric scraps and her portable sewing machine. She and Dorothy quilted at the folding table while the shop cooled and the overhead lights cast warm pools on the workbench. The quilt had no pattern and no deadline. They stitched whatever felt right and talked about small things and let the silences hold when they needed to. Bess mentioned once casually that she had started sleeping through the night again. She said it without emphasis, the way someone mentions the weather changing. Dorothy heard it for what it was. Eli's room at the Dawes house was still Eli's room. The model warship still sat on the dresser. The trophy still held its place. But Bess had washed the curtains and put fresh flowers on the nightstand, real ones from the garden, not the dried arrangement that had been sitting there for over a decade. The room was still Eli's. It was just breathing again. Lenore's shop had a permanent section along the east wall now, under a hand-lettered sign, the W.C. Calloway collection, 3 of Walter's finest pieces under warm display lighting, the blanket chest with the carved magnolia lid, a shaker chair with a woven rush seat, the child-size rocking chair that matched the full-size one Dorothy now kept on her porch. Beside them, Lenore had hung a photograph of Walter, black and white, taken at the lumber yard. Walter in his work shirt with sawdust on his collar and a quiet half-smile that Dorothy remembered better than her own face. Customers came to see the collection. Some bought the newer pieces Dorothy's students were beginning to produce. Simple work, honest work, signed with their own initials on the underside. Carlos had signed his first piece the week before. A step stool, poplar, with edges rounded smooth the way Walter had done. He burned his initials into the underside with a branding iron Hollis had made for him from a bent nail and a piece of rebar. CR, 2 letters in the wood. The beginning of a reputation that had not happened yet but might, with time and patience, become something worth knowing. Others stood and studied Walter's joinery and read the placard Lenore had written. Walter Calloway built with his hands for the love of building. These pieces are part of his legacy, continued by his wife Dorothy and the students of Calloway Workshop. On a Tuesday afternoon in late April, Dorothy was helping Tammy adjust the fence on the table saw when she heard footsteps on the driveway. She looked up. Lorraine stood at the open garage door. She was thinner than the Mediation, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, the kind Walter used to wear on weekends. Her hands hung at her sides. Empty. "Can I come in?" Dorothy did not answer right away. She looked at her daughter standing in the entrance to a workshop built from the sketches her father drew in a journal she found in a storage unit Lorraine never knew existed. Every link in that chain was visible between them. "What do you want, Lorraine?" "Nothing." Her voice quiet and stripped of everything it used to carry. No performance. No strategy. "I do not want anything. I just wanted to see what Dad built." She looked past Dorothy at the tools on the pegboard, at Walter's handwriting on the labels, at the rocking chair by the door catching the last of the afternoon light. Dorothy studied her face. The arrogance was gone. So was the evasion, the sideways glances, the rehearsed smoothness. What was left was a woman in a doorway with nothing to trade and no leverage to use, asking permission to be in a room. Dorothy reached behind her and picked up a piece of rough-cut poplar and a sheet of 80 grit sandpaper. She held them out. "Your father would have started you here." Lorraine took the wood and the sandpaper. She sat on the stool at the far end of the workbench, and without a word she began to sand, long even strokes, following the grain, steady and unhurried. The sound of sandpaper on raw wood joined the hum of the overhead lights and the soft scrape of Carlos's chisel from the other end of the bench. An hour passed. Lorraine sanded the board smooth on both sides. She did not speak. She did not look for approval. She just worked. When the clock read 5, Carlos set down his tools and walked over to Dorothy, who was sweeping sawdust near the bench. "Who is that?" His voice low. "My daughter." Carlos was quiet for a moment, watching Lorraine turn the sanded board in her hands. "The one who kicked you out. The one who is learning." Carlos looked at her. Then he nodded, picked up his backpack, and headed for the door. At the threshold, he paused. "See you Thursday, Miss Calloway." "See you Thursday, Carlos." Lorraine left shortly after, carrying the sanded board under her arm. Dorothy did not know if she would come back. She did not know if she wanted her to. But she had handed her daughter sandpaper and wood, and that was Walter's way of starting. You begin with the rough and you work toward smooth, and you do not skip steps. That evening, after the shop was swept and the tools were hung, and Hollis had collected his wax paper and Bess had packed her sewing machine into its quilted case, Dorothy carried the rocking chair out to the front porch. She set it in the corner by the railing, facing west, where it caught the last of the day's light. This was where it belonged. Her mother's rocking chair had been on a porch just like this one, cherry wood catching fireflies. And now Walter's chair was here, answering a memory she had shared once on a summer evening and never expected anyone to hold on to. She sat down. The springs creaked, settled, held. The cherry jewelry box sat in her lap. She opened it and touched the necklace inside. Wooden beads hand-turned on Walter's lathe, each one different in grain and color. A jeweler named Doris Kessler had finished the last 2 beads for her, matching Walter's technique with careful hands using cherry stock from the storage unit. The chain was new. The beads were Walter's. Dorothy lifted the necklace and clasped it behind her neck. The beads rested against her collarbone, smooth and warm and light enough to forget and solid enough never to. Walter's watch glinted on her wrist. 3:47. Still keeping time in its own way. In the driveway, Hollis's blue truck idled beside the boxwoods. Carlos was helping unload a stack of donated lumber from the truck bed, planks of poplar and soft maple that the yard had set aside for the workshop. Carlos carried 2 boards at a time, his arms straining under the weight, his face set with focus. Hollis said something from the tailgate. Carlos responded. And from the porch, Dorothy could not hear the words, but she saw Carlos almost smile. The magnolia was blooming. White blossoms covered its branches, small and quiet, the kind that opened slowly and held on long past when the wind should have taken them. 46 springs now that tree had bloomed in this yard. It would bloom again next year, and the year after that, long after the people watching it were gone. Dorothy rocked gently and looked out at the street settling into evening. She thought about Walter's letter folded in the nightstand drawer upstairs. "I was never good at plans," he had written. "I was good at building things. So that is what I did. I just kept building." She thought about $15 and a nickel and a grocery bag, and a door groaning open in a storage facility on Route 12. About a rocking chair sitting in the dark, waiting for someone to find it. About a crowd going silent because they had been laughing at a woman who had nothing. And then the door went up, and what was sitting in the dark was beautiful. Home is not a building. It is wherever someone kept working on something they loved, hoping you would find it someday. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan. The nickel was there. The same one Walter had pressed into her palm in 1974 outside the movie theater on Maple Avenue. Warm from her body heat, smooth from 50 years of being carried. She held it between her thumb and forefinger and turned it in the evening light. Then she closed her hand around it and held it against her chest, beside the wooden beads, beside the watch that had stopped 3 years ago and never needed to start again. She ran her other hand along the arm of the rocking chair. Smooth wood, patient work. A man who measured twice and loved quietly and built things that outlasted him. The chair held her. The porch held the chair. And everything Walter had made, every joint and surface and careful grain-matched seam, held the life she was still building. The sun dropped below the tree line. The light turned gold, then amber, then the soft gray of early evening. Carlos and Hollis finished stacking the lumber. Carlos waved from the driveway before climbing into the truck for his ride back to his foster home. Dorothy raised her hand. Inside, the workshop was dark. Walter's tools hung in their rows on the pegboard, each one clean and labeled and waiting for tomorrow. Sawdust on the floor needed sweeping. Poplar needed stacking. Tammy's shelf unit needed its final coat of finish. There was always more to do. Dorothy closed her eyes and rocked. The chair creaked softly beneath her. The breeze carried sawdust and magnolia blossoms and the first real warmth of spring, and she breathed it in and let it go. She was home. If this story moved you, leave one word in the comments. Just one word that describes how you feel right now, and share it. Share it with your sister, your mother, your neighbor, your friend who is going through something hard and needs to remember that the people who throw you away do not get to decide your worth. Because the best chapters do not always come first. Sometimes they come last, and sometimes they come from a storage unit on Route 12 that nobody bothered to open. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, it is never too late to build something beautiful.